Today, we finally get to embrace our true guts fantasy and become the strongest berserkers possible for Vykas. Just like you guys always have the strongest comments, they leave me feeling like a king. So thank you, because it really does inspire me to make us the strongest together as Mayhem and as Berserker's technique. So both of those text guides will be linked in the description, just in case you forget and have already been in the Discord for the entire day. So while you're down there, you already know what to do. And just remember, my name is Claysthetics, and we're running right into it. And don't forget to like the video. It's the only way YouTube knows I exist. And lighting this off, you already know I'm starting with Mayhem, because we've hit a massive milestone and an insane power spike from our Nightmare Relic set. When we got our 2-piece for the Consume Damage, you already knew it was going to give us everything we needed. And with our 6-piece, we're going to get that complete control over our build to use all the W key energy anybody could have ever needed. And since I know reading is not our strongest point at any stage, the only thing you need to know about Nightmare is that you have to use your ult to just get the activation from it. You get the magic addiction, and that's where your big dick bonus damage is going to come from. And then your only focus when you're fighting, when you're casting your skills, is to make sure you don't dump your big damage skills into boundless MP during your burst windows. And with the rotation that I kind of went over in the last video, it gave you a good idea of where to start. But now I'm going to go over it a little more in depth, because we kind of get forced into it now to do our maximum DPS. So as Mayhem, to make sure you get magic addiction from your 4-piece of Nightmare right away, you want to open with your Red Dust immediately ultimate. After that, you're just going to hit your finish strike, and then immediately Chainsword into your strike wave. You'll see why in a second. You can either cast a couple autos here. You're basically just kind of ricing until you can Chainsword again into a Dark Rush. After this, you want to make sure that you cast your Chainsword before the next rotation of skills. You know, Chainsword, Red Dust, Hellblade, then immediately cast your finish strike into your Swordstorm. Without the Chainsword, I personally can't get in all 4 skills, so I make sure that I Chainsword beforehand. Then as you can see, your strike wave's coming back up right as your Red Dust is coming up. So it lets you really start getting into a really solid rotation of running back and forth between those skills, and you really just start popping off across the board. After that, the abilities kind of line themselves up, and it's the most possible DPS I could get out of Mayhem after tons of testing. And as the fights progress, usually they just work themselves out as long as you believe in the W key and embrace it as your own. So just to go over the general text guide for Mayhem and everything you need to succeed, there's a few things on here that throw people off, and that's why I'm going to go over 3 different builds for Mayhem later on. But I only made a text key for the main bread and butter build because it has the most flexibility and is kind of the best. So the first thing to talk about is our tripod priority, because I know it's been on a ton of people's minds, and I've seen the question in the comments and so many times on Discord. So for the skills, we automatically want to get those rank 5 tripods on. Of course, we have to start with Red Dust and Vital Point Hit. It gives you 33% crit chance and really lets you build around dumping your big cooldowns in that Red Dust window and just making it have insane value. And it also lets you hit breakpoints for those different builds that I'm going to go over after I'm done talking about the tripods. And the move that pairs perfectly with Red Dust is Finish Strike. It shares the same cooldown and is literally just one of your biggest, best, and highest damage moves once it gets its full tripod setup. In my opinion, both of these are basically mandatory, and it's really important that you don't let people tell you to randomly cast Finish Strike outside of the Red Dust window, because you just end up losing out on so much if you do. After talking with people in the ZERKERGANG community and testing it myself, you end up losing out on actually a ton of damage and fluidity, which is probably just as important as the damage. And I know a couple people are going to cap me and say, but my strike wave. No, bro, trust me. I was a strike wave Andy too, but I've long since set sail from that boat. If you sim your strike wave realistically with 3 hits, and trust me, after a lot of casts and a lot of VOD reviews, that's basically all you're hitting on most of these bosses, because their hitboxes just aren't big enough. Like, look, I'm right up tight to the dummy, and sometimes you only hit 3 times. You have to take like that awkward half step back to get all 4, and this is a pretty long target. So hitboxes on something like Vykas are going to be almost impossible to hit 4 times. And you can even take a look at something like the wolves on Volton. Like, they have small hitboxes too. It's hard to hit them 4 times. So in a live situation with bosses with smaller hitboxes, there's no chance you're constantly hitting the 4x. Even on my personal tripods, after using and testing both, I can promise you Finish Strike is only going to feel better and give you more overall damage output than Strikewave could if you max both tripods out side by side. And when you look at my setup, it was a pretty fair battle between the two of them. It's just that Finish Strike ends up being easier to use and is way more consistent across the board. So because of that, I want to switch my lights out over as well. I just haven't had the opportunity. Now for the last couple of tripods and with the most recent nerfs that got targeted at the low HP tripods for Hellblade and Swordstorm, which are Deadly Blow and Flamestorm, they end up being the best when they're maxed out, and they should be just because you get the most out of them. And then you just want to max Earth Flip for Hellblade because it just ends up being absolutely insane. But Hellblade's Deadly Blow is actually only 0.5% more damage than Melt at max rank. And Melt can be used for Burst Deck and Mayhem, so pick whatever you want, honestly, out of those two. There really isn't a massive loss on that one. 0.5 really isn't going to make or break it. So if you do get lucky, take what you can get. So after talking about these in the ZERKERGANG Discord with the boys for the past couple weeks and testing them myself, I can pretty reliably say that this is going to give you the most value at this stage of the game for rank 5s. And if you get lucky like me, you can get a couple bonus rank 5s. And the reality is if you do get a lucky drop with 2 rank 5s on it that are really good, just keep that and just put a 4 in the dead slot, because that's what ended up happening to my setup. And it's just kind of a nice way to set yourself up for the future. So now we're going to run over the text guide really quick because we did rant a little bit about the Finish Strike. But what can I say? I like to talk. So changes we made, quick gem swap. We moved 1 CDR gem off of Tempest Slash and put the damage on Dark Rush. Late game, that 40% damage is just too insane to pass up, and it outweighs the CDR on Tempest Slash because it has a fairly low cooldown already. And rune-wise, we swapped our legendary Galewind over to Finish Strike and popped the purple one on Strikewave. Now, again, we talked about it in an older video, but you can use Judgment and Conviction on Tempest Slash and Shoulder Charge. But after the nerf of it and with Nightmare, I don't really think it's worth it to do the gimmick anymore. As for your cards, LOS is still BIS, but it is fairly difficult to awaken it up right now because of the way we get our cards, but the holy damage is super worth it. It's going to give you that 10% flat damage, I think, in 2 of the Vykas gates, but you do need to end up pushing that card set anyways for the percent damage later on in the future. And Lost Wing Cliff is just obviously the best runner-up, but if you're new or just unlucky, then you should really still run Nature's Elementals, and we'll meet again like we talked about in the first Berserker guide that is about to hit 350k views. Thanks again for the love on that one. Just don't let me catch you with a low rank like mine. Go live your dreams with this Lost Ark Merchants website and buy the cards when they're up. It just makes it so easy to max these 2 card sets out, and the main reason I didn't do it is because I have LOS 12, so we're already vibing. But now just to talk about what I changed on the engravings part of this text guide, they're mostly the same as before, but mana regen got removed as a budget tripod because if you're Nightmare, it's basically worthless. So we popped Ambush Master into that slot. The only big thing to note about engravings is if you take Grudge and are playing on curve for Vykas, which would be 1460 item level, you will be on the floor if you get hit by pretty much anything. So look to be 15 to 30 item levels higher, and you can go back to full W key energy. I mean, let's be real. We're going to W key anyways, but Grudge isn't that crazy increase, so don't let people push you into it if you don't feel comfortable running that increased damage taken. A lot of the other engravings on this list can be ran for only like a really slight DPS loss, but that huge gain in survivability, even I personally don't run with Grudge, and I'm the MVP in every game and in your heart, so don't think twice about it. But what I do run is Adrenaline because it sims a lot higher than a lot of the engravings on the list. It's just really annoying to use. It is nice to get that extra flexible swiftness accessory. The big downside is at any stage, if you lose your stacks, it turns into hot garbage, and it's fairly hard to keep them up if there's a lot of mechanics going out. So you catch me casting a lot of random chain swords and Tempest Slash just to try and keep my buff sometimes, because casting 6 skills to get the max buff out back is just pure agony. The last thing to talk about, though, is the Mayhem level 1 engraving, and if it's viable, you can build your build around it to max other stuff out, and you can get a really strong build out of it as a budget build. Just don't get too caught up in a crazy budget build, because when you start budgeting something like that, you can lose out pretty easily, and it ends up, in the long run, if you run bad engravings, just hurts your economy and your character for later. The kind of thing that I'm talking about that would hurt you in the long run would be something like a Mass Increase 1 or a Crisis Evasion 3. It's just bad and it doesn't give you any kind of value. So just keep that in mind. If you are going to run a budget build with Mayhem level 1, make sure your other 4 engravings are stacked, because I really do think you should invest things that will make your character have a solid backbone, just to make sure you're the strongest all the time. As for our stat lines and our 3 Mayhem builds, the basic build, which is also the strongest and has the most flexible engraving options, is 70 crit per 30 swift. You're looking to get 1600 crit here so that you get that 100% crit chance. 57% from stat, 33 from red dust, 10 back attack. Boom, 100% crit chance. And the 400 swift is going to give you 7% attack speed and 8.5% CDR. The other two builds I'm going to talk about are more CDR heavy. So the second build, which is the one I run, which is just kind of annoying, is the 1250 crit, 43% base crit chance, 15% of drone, 33 red dust, 10% back attack for 100% crit chance, 700 swift for the 12% attack speed and 15% CDR. It does go up quite a bit. So when we hit that final build with Precise Dagger, which is 1035 crit, same breakdown as before, just fishing for 100% crit chance, but it lets you get 900 swift for 15% attack speed and 20% CDR. All three of these builds have their strengths and their weaknesses and will scale into the late game because more CDR always ends up being a good thing. And you are looking at Adrenaline being a budget build with Precise Dagger being extreme budget. And in my opinion, I think that these three builds are probably my favorite for Mayhem. And if you're going to run level 1 Mayhem, then just max 4 of the best engravings on top of that, and you're going to be set. But now we're going to go over one of the most classic Berserker feeling builds where you're popping in and out of Enrage, and that's Brazil's Secret. And we changed the skills up in the last build video because it let us get into Enrage in 20 to 25-ish seconds, depending on the amount of focus tripods we have or the level that they're at. So it gives us a smooth transition into Enrage. When we can't use stimulant potions, just think something like Volton where you would prefer to take a time stop instead. So the rotation we're going to go over is to use one set of bottom skills. So we're looking at Maelstrom, Windblade, Tempest Slash, and then Mountain Crash into a Red Dust, Hellblade, and Finish Strike, and then Maelstrom and Strike Wave. And at this point, we're waiting for our Windblade and Tempest Slash, which will take us into the Enrage. If you have enough focus tripods, you should be enraged at your second Windblade, but guaranteed will be enraged at your second Tempest Slash. So then you pop your Enrage, you hit your Red Dust, your ultimate into Bloody Rush, Maelstrom, Strike Wave, and then some random skills, move around, whatever, and then Red Dust, Hellblade, Finish Strike. If you cast the abilities in this order, it's basically going to be switching back and forth, just alternating between big skills and big damage under Red Dust, and that's pretty much the most value you're going to be able to get out of it, in my opinion. And it kind of sets it up so that every other Red Dust you can Bloody Rush and Finish Strike, and every even Red Dust you can Finish Strike and Hellblade or Strike Wave. This should max your DPS out. Just make sure you're casting Bloody Rush with Red Dust. It's kind of most of your damage. So now just to quickly run down the text guide, because we're deep in here and I'm running out of hot air. I listed 3 sets in the ZERKERGANG with the ultimate W key energy and the mental of the Giga Chad. We all ended up agreeing that before the last build video that running 370% crit damage is pretty much the most alpha thing you can do and the only real way to play Berserk. Because anyone who tells you that you can't have that much because it's a DPS loss simply has a weak mental. Does it make sense on this chart? No, because it's off the chart. And since it's off the chart, nobody can tell you if it's wrong. But gear-wise, you run Entropy for the biggest crits and you'll have my support and the ZERKERGANG behind you. If you play Berserk and Mayhem, you kind of want to go Nightmare because it just lets you swap between both, and Mayhem really needs Nightmare, and Nightmare is actually pretty good for Berserk. And, you know, if you're feeling like the min-max guy that doesn't want to use 370% crit damage, I guess you can use Salvation. The world's really your oyster, and of those 3, I actually don't think any of them are bad picks. I personally play Mayhem, so when you see me in Berserk, I'll be running Nightmare. But just for a quick breakdown for what we changed to min-max in the text guide, rune-wise, again, we just swapped the Gale Winds on Strike Wave and Finish Strike. And as for the engravings, they pretty much stayed the same, but Spirit Absorption just makes the build feel so smooth. I'll probably be running it as a level 1 or a level 2 as my flex pick in the future, because even though my current build is pretty stacked, after playing with SA, the quality of life was just so good. And there really isn't a bunch of builds for Berserk in my opinion. You can drop Precise Dagger off, but it just fits so well that it's hard to give up, because gaining that 400 Swift on your neck really helps the CDR, which is the weakest point of the build. Tripod-wise, we kind of went over it already, as Mayhem and just rotated the stuff off of Swordstorm to Hellblade and just had a deeper commitment to Finish Strike, and then just made sure that we had all our focus stuff at level 4 because of how much value it gives us. So with all this, including the entropy set, you're going to end up at 100% crit chance, and I think overcap by 10%. You're going to get like 110 with the back attack. But who really cares? You're full beast mode anyways. Just like my patrons are true beast mode. I really want to thank you for the extra support. It helps me out a lot. And I hope you all stay beautiful, blessed, and safe out there so I can see you in the next one.